$5 million, Victoria Hale said, sliding the check across the polished conference table. Sign the papers, give up your rights to Sophie, and walk away. Ethan Cole stared at the number for maybe 3 seconds. There were more zeros on that check than he had ever seen attached to his name. Across from him sat one of the most powerful CEOs in Chicago, surrounded by lawyers in suits that probably cost more than his car. Victoria expected him to negotiate. She expected him to ask for 10. Instead, Ethan picked up the check, tore it cleanly in half, and placed both pieces back in front of her. My daughter isn't for sale. Nobody moved. One attorney slowly lowered his pen. Victoria's expression barely changed, but the silence around her did. She had spent her entire career learning that everyone had a number. Employees had one. Competitors had one. Politicians had one. Even relatives had one. Ethan Cole, a single father with medical debt, an old pickup, and less than $2,000 in savings, was supposed to have one too. Victoria just hadn't offered enough. At least, that was what she believed. What she didn't know was that the man she had just tried to buy was holding something that could prove the Hale family had no right to take Sophie from him in the first place. And before this story goes any further, if you believe some things should never have a price tag, take 1 second and hit subscribe, because what happened after Ethan walked out of that room changed who held the power in ways Victoria never saw coming. 11 days earlier, Ethan's biggest problem had been a broken water heater in Building C. He worked maintenance at a modest apartment complex outside Chicago, the kind of place where everybody knew which washing machine ate quarters and which neighbor would lend you jumper cables at 6 in the morning. The pay wasn't great, but it kept food in the refrigerator and the rent paid. Most important, it let him be home for Sophie. She was 8, obsessed with robots, and had recently decided that every cardboard box in their apartment was potential engineering material. Ethan had been raising her alone since his wife, Rachel, died. He didn't talk much about those years. He just kept moving. School drop-off. Work. Homework. Dinner. Repeat. That Tuesday afternoon, he was tightening a valve under a kitchen sink when his phone buzzed. The voicemail was from a law firm downtown. The woman speaking sounded careful and expensive. She said they represented Hale Meridian Group and needed to discuss a private family matter concerning his daughter. Ethan listened twice. He had never done business with Hale Meridian. He didn't own stock. He didn't know anyone there. But he knew the name Hale. Rachel had made him promise years ago that if anyone from that family ever contacted him about Sophie, he would not agree to anything until he opened the small gray lockbox she had left behind. Ethan had almost forgotten about it. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, he pulled the box from the back of his closet and wiped the dust from the lid. For the first time in 6 years, he turned the key. On top was an envelope in Rachel's handwriting. It had only 5 words on it. Ethan, if the Hales come. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Rachel's envelope in his hands and did not open it right away. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming behind him and the old wall clock ticking past midnight. Sophie was asleep down the hall. Her latest cardboard robot stood beside the couch with one crooked paper arm pointing toward the ceiling. Ethan finally opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter. Rachel had written it years earlier, when Sophie was still a baby. She told Ethan that if anyone named Hale ever came asking about their daughter, he needed to slow down, say nothing, sign nothing, and find a lawyer before making any decision. She did not explain why. She only wrote that her family had spent years believing money gave them the right to decide what happened to other people. Ethan read that sentence 3 times. Rachel had rarely talked about her parents. He knew there had been a falling out before they met. He knew she had grown up with money, though she never acted like it. When Ethan once asked why she had walked away from that life, Rachel had smiled and said she preferred knowing whether people loved her or her last name. He had never pushed harder. now he wished he had. Under the letter were several old documents, a business card from an attorney named Daniel Brooks, and a small flash drive marked with the Hale Meridian logo. Ethan reached for the drive, then stopped. Rachel's letter had been clear. Find a lawyer first. The next morning, he called Daniel. The number still worked. Daniel went silent when Ethan said his name. Then Ethan mentioned Sophie and the call from Hale Meridian. Do not meet them alone, Daniel said. And do not bring anything from that box. Ethan asked the obvious question. Why does a billion-dollar company care about my 8-year-old daughter? Daniel paused long enough to make Ethan uncomfortable. Because this is not really about the company, he said. It is about Rachel. Before Ethan could get more, Sophie came into the kitchen carrying her backpack and asking why there was no cereal left. Ethan ended the call and made toast instead. He watched her complain about a science project while tying one sneaker, completely unaware that strangers with private attorneys were suddenly interested in her life. 2 days later, Ethan received another call. This time, the request came directly from Victoria Hale's office. They wanted him downtown Friday morning. Daniel agreed to come, but an emergency hearing delayed him at the courthouse. Ethan could have canceled. Instead, he put on the only suit he owned, dropped Sophie at school, and drove into Chicago. Hale Meridian's headquarters looked like another world. Glass walls. Quiet elevators. People moving through the lobby with expensive coffee and security badges. Ethan checked in at 9:45 for a 10 o'clock meeting. They made him wait until 10:38. When the conference room doors finally opened, Victoria Hale was already seated at the far end of the table. She did not offer coffee. She did not ask about his drive. She looked at a file in front of her, then at Ethan. Mr. Cole, I will save us both some time, she said. Sophie is Rachel Hale's daughter. Ethan stared at her. Victoria closed the file. Rachel was my sister. Ethan said nothing for several seconds. He had expected a lawyer, maybe some explanation about Rachel's past. He had not expected to be sitting across from her sister. Victoria watched him carefully. Rachel never told you, she asked. She told me she had family she did not speak to, Ethan said. She never told me her sister ran Hale Meridian. Victoria leaned back. Rachel made a lot of choices we did not understand. Ethan noticed the way she said choices. Not mistakes, exactly, but close enough. Leaving your family was one of them, he asked. One of the attorneys shifted in his chair. Victoria ignored him. She explained that Rachel had left the Hale family years earlier after a serious disagreement with their father, Richard Hale, the chairman of Hale Meridian. She had stopped using the family name publicly. Then she met Ethan. Then Sophie was born. Victoria said the family had only recently confirmed that Sophie existed. Ethan did not believe that part. Rachel had been gone 6 years. Rich families with private attorneys did not suddenly discover an 8-year-old child by accident. What do you want? Ethan asked. Victoria folded her hands. Sophie is a Hale. My father is 74. His health is not good. He wants his granddaughter to have the opportunities Rachel walked away from. Ethan almost laughed. She has opportunities. Victoria glanced at the file. You work maintenance at an apartment complex. Your annual income is $48,000. You rent a 2-bedroom apartment. Sophie attends an underfunded public school. Ethan felt his face grow warm. You investigated me. We did our homework. No. You investigated me. Victoria did not apologize. Instead, she talked about private schools, college funds, travel, tutors, and a home with more space than Sophie could imagine. Ethan listened until he understood what was happening. This was not an invitation to meet Sophie. This was a sales pitch. If you want to know your niece, you could have started by asking, he said. Victoria's expression tightened. This is bigger than weekend visits. One attorney slid a folder toward Ethan. Victoria explained that the Hale family was prepared to pursue a formal guardianship arrangement if necessary. She said they had concerns about Ethan's financial ability to provide Sophie with long-term stability. Ethan pushed the folder back without opening it. Being richer than me does not make you her parent. The room went quiet. Victoria told him nobody was questioning whether he cared about Sophie. They were questioning whether love was enough. Ethan stood. Then you are questioning the wrong thing. Victoria's voice stopped him before he reached the door. Mr. Cole, courts consider the best interests of the child. We are trying to avoid making this unpleasant. Ethan turned around. He remembered Rachel sitting beside him during her final months, checking her phone after every hospital appointment and pretending she was not disappointed when nobody called. He remembered asking whether there was anyone from her family he should contact. Rachel had always said no. Now Victoria was sitting behind a table worth more than Ethan's monthly rent, talking about family responsibility. You want to know what I do not understand? Ethan asked. Victoria waited. If the Hales cared so much about Rachel, why did she spend her last year waiting for one of you to answer the phone? For the first time since Ethan entered the room, Victoria lost her polished expression. She looked at him as if he had said something impossible. What phone calls? She asked. Ethan stared at her. That was when he realized Rachel had kept more than one secret. Victoria kept staring at Ethan. Rachel never called me, she said. Ethan almost walked out, but something in her face made him stop. She called somebody, he said. More than once. Victoria looked toward one of the attorneys. The man suddenly became interested in the papers in front of him. Ethan noticed. So did Victoria. Who handled family communications 6 years ago? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. Then the older attorney cleared his throat and said Richard Hale's private office had managed anything involving Rachel. Victoria's jaw tightened. Ethan did not know what that meant yet, but he knew enough to leave. My lawyer will contact you, he said. Victoria did not stop him this time. 3 days later, another envelope arrived by courier. This one contained records about Ethan's income, medical debt left from Rachel's treatment, his truck loan, and even 2 late rent payments from 4 years earlier. Daniel Brooks read the documents across his desk and shook his head. They are building a picture, he said. Not of who you are. Of what they can make you look like. Ethan understood. On paper, he was a single father with limited savings and old debt. The Hales had private schools, gated property, attorneys, and more money than Sophie could spend in 10 lifetimes. Can they take her? Ethan asked. Daniel did not give him a comforting answer. Not just because they are rich. But they can make this expensive, exhausting, and frightening. The pressure started almost immediately. Ethan's supervisor called him into the office the next morning. The apartment complex had recently been purchased by a property company connected to Hale Meridian. Management was restructuring. Ethan's position was being eliminated. His supervisor looked embarrassed. You are the best maintenance guy I have, he said. This came from above me. Ethan walked back to his truck carrying a cardboard box with his tools and a framed picture Sophie had drawn for him. By lunchtime, Victoria's office was calling again. This time, Ethan agreed to meet. Daniel came with him. The conference room felt different now. Victoria had fewer lawyers around her, but a document waited on the table. She told Ethan she wanted to settle everything privately. Then she slid the check toward him. $5 million. In exchange, Ethan would sign papers surrendering his parental rights and agree not to challenge a future guardianship arrangement involving Sophie. Daniel immediately told Ethan not to touch anything. Ethan barely heard him. He looked at Victoria. Did you have me fired? Your employment situation is separate from this discussion, she said. That answer told him enough. You think because I lost my job, I will sell you my kid. I think $5 million could change your life. Ethan picked up the check. For 1 second, Victoria seemed to relax. Then he tore it in half and placed the pieces on the table. My daughter is not for sale. Victoria's face went cold. Then understand what happens next. My family will pursue every legal option available. Ethan stood. So will I. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Ethan opened Rachel's gray lockbox again. This time, he removed everything. Beneath the letter was a second envelope he had missed because it was pressed flat against the bottom. Inside were old Hale Meridian financial records and a handwritten note telling him to contact Daniel before opening the flash drive. Ethan called him immediately. Daniel arrived 40 minutes later. He took one look at the Hale Meridian logo on the drive and went pale. Ethan, he said quietly, Rachel told me this existed. I prayed nobody would ever come looking for it. Daniel did not plug in the flash drive. Not yet. He sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table and asked to see every document Rachel had left behind. For almost an hour, he sorted papers into small piles while Ethan watched the clock and kept his voice low so Sophie would not wake up. Finally, Daniel pulled out an old trust agreement with Rachel's full legal name printed across the first page. This is why they are here, he said. Ethan looked at the pages. Most of the language meant nothing to him. Explain it like I fix water heaters for a living. Daniel almost smiled. Rachel's mother created a family trust before she died. Part of it included shares in Hale Meridian. Rachel was one of the beneficiaries. Ethan frowned. Rachel never had money like that. Because she walked away before taking control of it. Daniel pointed to another section. But walking away did not erase her bloodline. According to this agreement, if Rachel died, her interest passed to her biological children. Ethan looked down the hallway toward Sophie's room. You are saying this belongs to Sophie. I am saying Sophie may have a legal claim to a significant block of Hale Meridian stock. Ethan sat back. $5 million suddenly looked very different. How significant? Daniel hesitated. Based on the old numbers, tens of millions. Maybe more now. Ethan felt sick, not excited. The Hales had not come looking for a granddaughter because Richard was getting old and sentimental. Someone wanted control. Daniel finally inserted the flash drive into Ethan's laptop. It contained copies of emails, financial reports, trust amendments, and messages Rachel had saved before leaving the company. She had worked in Hale Meridian's finance department years before Ethan met her. That was another piece of her life he had never known. One email caught Daniel's attention. It discussed consolidating voting control of family shares under Richard Hale. Rachel had refused to sign. Another showed that her trust interest remained separate. That matters, Daniel said. If Sophie's shares carry voting rights, somebody could have a problem. Ethan stared at him. Victoria. Maybe. Maybe not. Daniel opened another file. It was a letter Rachel had written but apparently never sent. She said her father had pressured her for months to sign away control of her shares. When she refused, the family relationship collapsed. Ethan remembered Victoria's face when he mentioned Rachel's unanswered calls. Victoria did not know Rachel called, he said. Daniel looked at him. Then somebody made sure she did not know. The next morning, Ethan received notice that the Hale family had filed for a formal review of Sophie's living situation. Daniel told him not to panic. The filing did not mean they would win. It meant the pressure was increasing. Then Daniel made a call to an independent trust attorney and asked for the original Hale family documents to be verified. By late afternoon, the attorney called back. Rachel's trust had never been dissolved. Sophie was almost certainly the lawful successor to Rachel's interest. Daniel wrote one number on a legal pad and turned it toward Ethan. The estimated value was over $40 million. Ethan stared at it, then remembered the check Victoria had pushed across the table. They offered me $5 million to walk away from more than $40 million that belongs to my daughter. Daniel nodded slowly. That is what it looks like. Ethan shook his head. Then Victoria knew exactly what she was doing. Daniel did not answer right away. He pulled up one final document from the flash drive, an internal authorization form dated only 2 weeks earlier. The order to resolve Sophie's guardianship situation had not come from Victoria's office. It had come directly from Richard Hale. Ethan looked at Richard Hale's name on the authorization form and felt something shift. So Victoria was following orders, he asked. Daniel shook his head. Do not excuse her yet. She offered you the money. She threatened legal action. Whatever Richard started, Victoria made her own choices. Ethan knew that was true. But it also meant there was another layer. Daniel sent copies of the verified trust documents to Victoria's attorney the next morning. He included one simple request. Withdraw the guardianship action, restore Ethan's employment, and stop contacting Sophie until the trust issue was resolved. Victoria called Ethan herself less than an hour later. Where did you get those documents? She asked. From my wife. There was silence. Rachel had them. Rachel had a lot of things nobody bothered to ask about. Victoria wanted a private meeting. Ethan refused until Daniel could attend. That afternoon, they met in a smaller conference room at Hale Meridian. No assistants. No line of attorneys. Victoria looked tired for the first time Ethan had seen her. She placed a copy of the trust agreement on the table. I did not know about this. Ethan almost laughed. You expect me to believe that? No. But it is true. Victoria explained that Richard had told her Sophie was the only surviving child of her estranged sister and that he wanted the family reunited before his health got worse. He had also told her Ethan was refusing reasonable financial support and might use Sophie's connection to the Hale name for money. So you decided to buy me before I could ask for anything, Ethan said. Victoria looked down. Yes. It was the first honest answer she had given him. Then Daniel showed her the internal authorization form. Victoria read it twice. Her face changed. My father signed this before I ever met Ethan. Daniel nodded. Which means the plan to gain control over Sophie was already moving. Victoria stood and walked to the window. She had spent years running Hale Meridian, but Richard was still chairman. He controlled old family trusts, board relationships, and records Victoria had never questioned. She made 2 phone calls while Ethan sat there. The first went to the company's general counsel. The second went to the trust department at a bank Hale Meridian had used for decades. The answers were not good. Rachel's shares had never disappeared. They had been listed for years under a temporary family holding structure while no successor claim was filed. If Sophie's claim was confirmed, those shares would leave Richard's control. Victoria returned to the table. How much? Ethan asked. Enough to matter in a board vote, she said. Now he understood. Richard did not need Sophie because he missed Rachel. He needed Sophie under family control because Sophie owned something he could not afford to lose. Ethan stood. Then fix it. Victoria looked at him. It is not that simple. It was simple when you investigated my bank account. It was simple when I lost my job. It was simple when you put a price on my daughter. Victoria had no answer. Ethan told her exactly what he wanted. If she truly had not known, she could prove it. She could tell the board what happened. She could admit that company resources had been used to pressure a single father in a private family dispute. Victoria's expression tightened. Doing that could damage her position and expose her father. You are asking me to go against the chairman of my own company. Ethan shook his head. I am asking you to decide what kind of person you are when your money cannot make the decision for you. The next morning, Victoria requested an emergency board meeting. Before it began, Richard Hale filed a new statement with the court. He claimed Ethan had known about Sophie's inheritance for years and had raised her for one reason, money. Richard Hale's accusation reached Ethan before breakfast. Daniel called at 6:45 and told him not to read the news online. That was enough to make Ethan understand how bad it was. By 8, a local business site was already asking whether a Chicago father had hidden a multimillion-dollar inheritance connected to Hale Meridian. Ethan sat at the kitchen table while Sophie ate waffles and complained that her robot needed better wheels. He looked at her and realized how strange the whole thing had become. People with private offices and company jets were arguing about whether he loved his daughter because she might own stock he had not even known existed 2 weeks earlier. The custody hearing was moved up. Richard's attorneys argued that Ethan had a financial interest in keeping control of Sophie because, as her father, he could potentially influence her trust. They showed the court his debt, his lost job, his small apartment. Then they showed the estimated value of Sophie's inheritance. More than $40 million. The suggestion was simple. Ethan was not protecting Sophie. He was protecting access to her money. Daniel leaned toward him. We can fight every part of this, he whispered. Ethan shook his head. No. Let us make it impossible. When Daniel stood, he announced that Ethan would voluntarily agree to place every dollar, every share, and every future distribution belonging to Sophie into an independently managed trust. Ethan would have no personal withdrawal rights. He would not be paid as trustee. He would not be allowed to borrow against it. Major financial decisions would require an independent fiduciary and court oversight until Sophie became an adult. Richard's attorney stopped writing. The judge looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Cole, you understand what you are giving up? Yes, Your Honor. Even if you lose your job again? Yes. Even if you face financial hardship? Ethan looked toward Richard, who sat behind his attorneys in a dark suit, watching without expression. Her money is hers. I was her father before I knew it existed. I will be her father if every dollar disappears tomorrow. Daniel then produced Rachel's letter. Not the short note from the lockbox. A longer document stored on the flash drive, dated months before her death. Rachel described how Richard had pressured her to transfer control of her Hale Meridian shares back into a family voting structure. She had refused. After that, calls stopped being returned. Messages disappeared. Rachel wrote that she feared the same pressure might someday reach Sophie. Richard's attorneys objected to parts of the document, but Daniel had already verified its date and electronic records. Then the courtroom doors opened. Victoria walked in with Hale Meridian's general counsel. She had come directly from the emergency board meeting. Richard turned toward her. Victoria did not sit beside him. She sat behind Ethan's side of the room. When called, she confirmed that Richard had authorized the effort to gain control over Sophie before Victoria ever met Ethan. Then she admitted something harder. She admitted that she had personally approved the $5 million offer. She admitted she had allowed company investigators to examine Ethan's finances. And she admitted that his employment had been affected while the family was pressuring him. I believed I was protecting my family, Victoria said. I was wrong. Mr. Cole was protecting his. Richard's case did not collapse in one dramatic second. It collapsed piece by piece, document by document, until his story no longer made sense. But before the judge could finish addressing the guardianship request, Hale Meridian's general counsel handed Daniel one more document from the board meeting. Daniel read it, looked at Victoria, then turned to Ethan. Richard Hale had just been placed on administrative leave as chairman pending an independent investigation. By the end of the hearing, Richard's request for guardianship had been denied. The judge found no evidence that Ethan was an unfit parent and no reason to remove Sophie from the only home she had ever known. The trust issue would be handled separately, under independent supervision, exactly as Ethan had requested. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited near the elevators. Ethan ignored them. He wanted to pick Sophie up from school and hear about anything that had nothing to do with Hale Meridian. Victoria followed him into the hallway. For once, there were no lawyers standing around her. Ethan. He stopped but did not turn immediately. I owe you an apology, she said. Ethan faced her. You owe Sophie one too. Victoria nodded. I know. She told him the board had opened an independent investigation into Richard's use of company employees, legal resources, and affiliated businesses during the custody dispute. His authority as chairman had been suspended. The company was also reviewing Ethan's termination. Reviewing? Ethan asked. Victoria caught the word. You are right. That was the wrong word. Your position is being restored with back pay. Ethan shook his head. I am not coming back because you feel guilty. Then come back because you earned the job before any of this happened. That stopped him. A few weeks earlier, Victoria had sat across from Ethan and decided what his life was worth by looking at his income, his debt, and his address. Now she was standing in a courthouse hallway waiting for him to decide whether he wanted anything from her. Ethan understood the reversal, but he did not enjoy it. He simply refused to waste it. There are conditions, he said. Victoria almost smiled at the irony. I am listening. Ethan held up one finger. No money gets offered to Sophie without going through the independent trust. A second finger. No lawyer contacts her school, doctors, teachers, or anyone else in her life unless Daniel knows about it. Then a third. And if you want to be her aunt, you do it like a normal person. No gifts worth thousands of dollars. No private school promises. No trying to impress her with what you own. Victoria nodded slowly. What does a normal aunt do? Ethan thought about it. Shows up. Listens. Remembers what the kid cares about. Robots, Victoria said. Ethan looked at her. You remembered. She is Rachel's daughter. Ethan's expression changed. She is Sophie. Start there. Victoria accepted that too. Then Ethan gave her the hardest condition. You tell her what happened when she is old enough to understand. You do not make your father the only villain. You tell her what you did. Victoria looked down for a moment. That is fair. Ethan started toward the elevator, but Victoria stopped him with one last question. Do you think you will ever forgive me? Ethan pressed the button. I do not know you well enough to answer that. The elevator doors opened. But Sophie gets to decide whether she wants to know you. I will not take that choice away from her the way your family tried to take choices away from us. Victoria stood there as the doors closed. The next morning, Hale Meridian announced Richard's suspension publicly. By afternoon, the independent trust attorney confirmed Sophie's claim to Rachel's shares was moving forward. And for the first time since the Hale family entered Ethan's life, nobody was asking him what it would cost to make him disappear. They were asking him what happened next. 6 months later, Sophie still woke up in the same 2-bedroom apartment. She still went to the same school. She still left cardboard, wires, and tiny plastic wheels all over Ethan's kitchen table. The biggest change was that Ethan no longer worried about someone using money to decide where his daughter belonged. Sophie's inheritance had been confirmed and placed into the independent trust. Ethan could not use it to pay his rent, replace his truck, or make his own life easier. That was exactly how he wanted it. Hale Meridian's investigation found that Richard had used company resources in a private family dispute and had hidden information connected to Rachel's shares. He resigned as chairman. Victoria remained chief executive officer, but she changed more than a few policies. She separated company resources from Hale family matters and restored the jobs of employees affected by decisions connected to Richard's actions. Ethan returned to work too, with full back pay. He did not ask for a promotion. He did not ask for special treatment. He wanted the job he had earned before anyone knew his daughter might someday be worth millions on paper. Victoria kept her promise about Sophie. The first time she visited Ethan's apartment, she arrived without a driver, without an assistant, and without an expensive gift. She brought a pizza. Sophie opened the box, looked at the mushrooms, and immediately told her aunt she had made a terrible decision. Victoria laughed and ordered another one. It was awkward. It was normal. That mattered. Over the next few months, Victoria learned that being Sophie's aunt had nothing to do with trust documents or the Hale name. It meant listening to long explanations about robot motors. It meant remembering school events. It meant showing up when she said she would. She never tried to replace Rachel, and Ethan never asked Sophie to forgive anyone. He simply gave her room to know Victoria on her own terms. Then came the school science fair. Sophie had spent weeks building a small robot designed to carry groceries across a room. Ethan helped with the loose wheels, but Sophie insisted the design was hers. When the judges announced that she had won first place in her grade, she searched the crowd. Ethan was in the front row, clapping so hard that another parent laughed. Victoria stood farther back, holding her phone but not checking it for once. Sophie ran to Ethan first. She hugged him and showed him the ribbon. Then she looked over his shoulder and waved Victoria closer. That small gesture meant more to Victoria than any board vote ever had. Later, while Sophie explained her robot for what had to be the 20th time, Ethan remembered the torn check on that conference table. $5 million had once seemed like the biggest number in the story. It was not. $40 million was not either. The real value had been sitting beside him every morning eating cereal and asking where her other sneaker went. Victoria had needed months to understand something Ethan knew the moment she pushed that check toward him. A parent who truly loves a child does not start calculating when the offer gets bigger. If this story made you think of someone who showed up for you when money could not solve the problem, leave their name or simply the word family in the comments. And if you want more stories about ordinary people refusing to let wealth decide their worth, a like and a subscribe help more people find them. Sophie finally got her robot moving in a straight line. Victoria cheered. Ethan smiled. Nobody in that school gym cared who controlled Hale Meridian. Nobody cared what Sophie's shares were worth. For that afternoon, she was simply an 8-year-old girl standing between her father and her aunt, proud of something she had built herself. Victoria had once believed Ethan refused her money because he wanted more. In the end, she learned the truth. He had refused because the one thing she wanted to buy had never been for sale.